The first thing Eva noticed wasn't the silence. It was the pressure of fabric twisted around her throat, as if someone had dragged her here and tied her own dress too tightly in punishment. The room was unfamiliar, the air too still. And when she reached up to loosen the knot, her fingers froze. Because the scent on her skin wasn't hers. It was Kane's. Her wolf stirred faintly, not from recognition but from shame. Her head throbbed, her limbs ached, and the cold floor beneath her told her everything she feared. This was not home. This was not safety. This was an ending. Or maybe a beginning. The flicker of torchlight along damp stone barely outlined a door. But Eva didn't move. Her memories were fragments, bruised things. Kane's voice echoing softly, not with anger but with finality. A look, not cruel, just cold. She had always thought the first time she felt his scent so close would mean something. Now it was clinging to her like a mistake she never agreed to make. She pulled her knees close, ignoring the tightness in her chest. No one was coming. No one would ask if she was okay. Because this was the part where she was supposed to disappear. They said omegas belonged in silence. Eva had learned that long before her wolf ever stirred. She was half wolf, half human, and all invisible. In a pack ruled by dominance, loud voices and sharp stares, Eva had spent her life on the edges, serving tables, folding blankets, tending to the pups others claimed. Kane had been the exception. The alpha's son, who smiled at her once when he caught her sketching wolves on the back of an old tray. She'd carried that smile like a secret promise, even when it meant nothing. But now, sitting alone in a cold border shelter, that memory felt like a betrayal. She had believed, perhaps stupidly, that he saw her. That the flicker in his eyes wasn't pity but recognition. She never imagined he'd be the one to walk her to the border. Not with cruelty but worse, with indifference. No anger. No heartbreak. Just the quiet kind of goodbye that told her she didn't matter enough to hurt. That was what stayed with her now. Not the leaving, but how easy it had been for him. The gossip had started before her disappearance. Whispers that she was obsessed. That Kane was simply being kind. That a girl without a wolf had no business dreaming of anything higher than the kitchens. Eva had heard them all, but she'd never expected Kane to believe them. And maybe he didn't. Maybe it was never about her at all. Maybe he was protecting something, someone. The Luna's niece, perhaps. Or his father's legacy. Her heart didn't ache in the usual way. Felt numb. Like grief that didn't know where to settle. She remembered the fabric again. How tight it had been around her throat. It wasn't violent. It was careful. Like someone making sure she'd disappear quietly. She didn't scream. Wouldn't have, even if she could. But her silence wasn't obedience. It was memory. Memory of every time she thought she mattered. Of every time she wanted to believe Kane wasn't like the rest. The pack hadn't looked for her. No search party. No questions. A few of the elders likely assumed she'd run away, tired of being nothing. The younger wolves probably whispered stories of madness, obsession, maybe even exile. It didn't matter. Eva had always known her place. And yet, her wolf stirred again. It was faint, like a heartbeat beneath the skin, like breath through frost. Not power. Not rage. Something softer. Waking. She had never shifted before. Had spent years believing she never would. But here in solitude, her wolf wasn't hiding. It was watching. Listening. And Eva, for the first time, began to feel like maybe she wasn't broken. Just unheard. Days passed in measured stillness. She lived on water from a rusted pipe, stale bread left behind, and silence. No one came. No one remembered. Except her wolf. At night, Eva dreamed of things she didn't understand. A moon she'd never seen, voices that spoke without sound, Kane's scent at the back of her throat like unfinished questions. Her body didn't heal quickly. But her stillness became comfort. The quiet gave her space to feel what she'd never been allowed to. She stopped waiting. Not for rescue. Not for apology. But for the moment when she could stand on her own and say, "I'm still here." When she returned to the pack border, no one noticed. Not at first. She walked like a ghost, wrapped in the same dress, her hair longer, her eyes different. Not brighter, just steady. As if she knew something now that no one else did. Kane saw her before anyone spoke. He froze mid-step, scent catching in his throat. Eva didn't flinch. She didn't speak. But she didn't lower her gaze either. And that, more than anything, drew attention. The beta's daughter narrowed her eyes. Whispers rippled like wind through dry leaves. Is that her? Did she come back? But Eva didn't need their questions. She was no longer waiting to be chosen. She had already chosen herself. The Luna summoned her within a day. The questions were laced with politeness, but the judgment was sharp. Where had she been? Who helped her? Why had she returned? Eva answered none of them. Not out of defiance, but because none of them mattered. She had no story that would satisfy anyone. Still, the Luna watched her closely. Not like a threat but like a puzzle. Kane didn't speak during the meeting. He stood by the door, arms folded, silent. But when Eva left the room, she didn't look back. Her story wasn't about him anymore. And maybe that was why he started following her with his eyes. They gave her a small room in the servants' quarters again. No apologies. Just an open door and stale sheets. But Eva didn't mind. The walls were the same, but she wasn't. And that made all the difference. She moved quietly, accepted chores, listened to the gossip flow like river water. Some said she was cursed. Others, that she'd met a rogue who awakened her. But one rumor stuck louder than the rest, that Kane had marked her. Briefly. Before the rejection. Before the disappearance. Eva didn't confirm or deny. And that silence said more than truth ever could. Kane found her near the storage barn, alone, brushing out the horses. He didn't say her name. Just watched her work for a moment too long. Then, "You look different." Eva kept her eyes on the brush. "You don't." The silence between them stretched. It wasn't cold. Just heavy. And for the first time, Kane didn't act like the Alpha's heir. He looked like someone unsure of what to say. But Eva wasn't angry. Not yet. She was just tired of silence being mistaken for weakness. The Luna's niece, Marin, cornered her that night. Polished, perfect, and sharp-tongued. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said, smile razor-thin. "Coming back. Stirring up stories." Eva didn't respond. But her wolf stirred again, low and aware. Marin leaned closer. "He's moved on. We all have." Eva only nodded once. Not in agreement but in understanding. Let them talk. Let them wonder. She wasn't here for Kane. She was here because leaving once had taught her how to return different. And now they would have to learn how to speak to her all over again. Eva walked the village with measured steps. Not out of fear but to remind herself that she belonged. The way others paused when she passed didn't escape her. The whispers hadn't stopped. They never would. Some stared at her like a returning ghost, others with pity they didn't bother to hide. She let it all roll off her. Let them talk. Let them speculate. She was done living in their silences. Marin's voice followed her wherever she went. Not her words but the tone. Clipped, accusing, territorial. The other girls fed off it, casting glances Eva remembered from their childhood, the kind that cut without ever needing a blade. But Eva didn't come back to fight for Kane. She came to reclaim her breath, her ground, her name. If they thought Kane was a prize, they could have him. Her wolf stirred at the thought, not in longing but in caution. A warning. Careful, it seemed to say. Old wounds reopen easily. Kane cornered her behind the training field a week later, where the dirt still smelled of sweat and claw marks. "You shouldn't ignore me," he said, voice low. Eva didn't flinch. "You made it clear I shouldn't speak at all," she answered, still without meeting his eyes. Her hands were steady, even if her pulse wasn't. He looked older. Not aged but burdened. As if her return had cracked something he'd worked hard to cement. But she refused to be his guilt. He wanted her to understand. To believe the rejection meant something else. But Eva knew better. Kindness offered too late always felt like manipulation. She walked away, but the tension lingered between them like a fire no one wanted to name. The elders began watching her. Not overtly, but with subtle glances and questions posed in casual tones. Where had she learned to move with such confidence? Why did she carry herself like someone with purpose now? She knew what they were really asking. Who did she meet out there? Who taught her to come back different? Eva offered no answers. Let them wonder. Let them invent stories. The truth was quieter than anything they imagined. It wasn't training or romance or exile that changed her. It was stillness, solitude, and grief that was allowed to stretch until it didn't break her anymore. Her wolf hadn't roared, it had whispered. And she had listened. Marin's jealousy bloomed into performance. Smiles too bright at dinners. Praise too loud during training. And Kane, ever the picture of indifference, didn't stop her. He let Marin sit too close, speak too much, and cast glances Eva refused to react to. It was all calculated. Power play dressed as affection. But Eva had learned the danger of reacting. Reaction gave them leverage. So she stayed still. And that stillness unbalanced them more than rage ever could. Kane's gaze always drifted toward her, even when he pretended otherwise. And Marin noticed. Her voice grew sharper. Her movements more desperate. The performance was cracking and Eva saw it all. An older wolf named Illyra approached Eva one afternoon near the market. Her hair silver and her eyes sharper than most. "I remember your mother," she said without preamble. "She was always too soft for this place. You're not." Eva didn't know what to say, so she stayed quiet. Illyra nodded. "You don't need to prove anything. But they will keep testing you anyway." It was the first kindness spoken without strings. No pity. No curiosity. Just acknowledgement. Eva felt something loosen inside her. Maybe she didn't need Kane's apology, the Luna's blessing, or the pack's approval. Maybe it was enough to be seen clearly by one person. Her wolf responded to Illyra's presence with a calm she hadn't expected. The tension between her and Kane became harder to ignore. He sought her out in small ways. A glance held too long, a task offered without request, the way he stood near her but never spoke first. Eva felt it too. Not the desire. The confusion. The ache of something unfinished that neither of them wanted to name. It wasn't love. Not anymore. But it wasn't nothing either. And that in-between space was the most dangerous of all. Because it invited hope. And Eva had spent too long burying hope in order to survive. Her wolf warned her again. Not yet. Marin began to unravel. Her jealousy slipped into cruelty masked as concern. "Are you sure you're okay, Eva?" she'd ask in front of others. "You still look so fragile." The pack watched, unsure whether to laugh or intervene. But Eva didn't flinch. "I prefer the quiet." "You should try it," she replied once. And the silence that followed echoed longer than any insult. Kane didn't defend Eva. But he didn't stop watching her either. That was the worst part. He lingered in doorways, hovered near her path, and yet never spoke of that night, the one neither of them could forget. The night he walked her to the border and didn't come back. Eva began spending time with the pups again, not because she was told to, but because she needed their laughter more than she needed answers. They didn't care about history or hierarchy. They cared that she listened, that she didn't talk down to them, and that she could sit still longer than anyone else. She didn't notice Kane watching from afar. But the others did. Especially Marin. One afternoon, a tray was knocked over near Eva's feet. No one saw who did it. But when she knelt to clean it, Kane crouched beside her. No words, just a look. And for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hung between them. A council meeting was called. Not for Eva, at least not officially. But she was mentioned. Her return had changed the rhythm of the pack. The Luna called it energy disruption. The Beta called it curiosity fatigue. Eva called it what it was, the one stirring projection. Unrest. She was just a mirror. And they didn't like what they saw reflected. Her wolf stayed quiet during the meeting but present, watching, waiting. The elders discussed boundaries and behavior. But what they were really doing was warning her without consequence. Eva heard it clearly: know your place. That night Kane came to her door. No guards, no excuse. Just him, and a silence so heavy she nearly couldn't breathe under it. "Why did you come back?" he asked finally. She looked at him. This boy who once led her to exile and now stood like he wanted forgiveness he wouldn't name. "Because this was mine too," she answered. "Even if they pretended it wasn't." He didn't speak again. But he didn't leave either. And when Eva closed the door gently in his face, it wasn't out of cruelty. It was the kindest way she knew to say, "You're not ready to mean it yet." Eva began to dream in color again. Not red from anger or gray from grief, but deep green, soft gold, skies she couldn't name. Her body felt different too. Lighter. Like the weight she'd carried all these years had shifted into something rooted rather than burdensome. It wasn't joy. But it wasn't pain either. And in a life where she'd only known extremes, that unfamiliar middle ground felt like magic. But magic always had a cost. The more at ease she grew, the more she noticed how the pack looked at her like she didn't belong. Not like a threat, something worse. Like a mistake that refused to fade. The younger wolves avoided her gaze. The elders watched her with quiet tension. Even the servants whispered when they thought she wasn't listening. As if her return wasn't healing the pack, but disturbing its delicate, dysfunctional balance. Kane was no longer avoiding her. But he wasn't exactly approaching her either. He became a fixture in her peripheral vision. Always near, never near enough. His silence said more than any apology might have. And Eva hated how her wolf responded to it. How it leaned toward the memory of his scent. Of a time when closeness didn't burn. One morning, she caught him watching her while she helped a pup fix a broken fence. He didn't look away when she met his eyes. There was no shame. Just something quiet and broken and waiting. She stood first. Walked away first. But it didn't feel like strength. Felt like survival. The pack began planning the next full moon ceremony. It was a time of pairing, bonding, announcements. Eva was not invited. Not directly. Not officially banned either. Just overlooked. Her name was not spoken. Her role unclear. Was a message. Loud in its silence. Illyra, the elder who once called her strong, brought it up over tea. "They don't know what to do with you," she said, as if it were a compliment. "They fear what doesn't fit." Eva nodded. She didn't need a title. But some part of her had hoped, just once, that being seen might come with a seat. Marin, of course, would be presented beside Kane. It wasn't official. But the Luna made it clear. The way she praised Marin's poise, her dedication, her suitability. It was suffocating. And Kane said nothing. He didn't protest. Didn't explain. Just stood beside Marin and looked elsewhere when Eva passed. Eva tried not to care. Tried not to let her wolf ache in response to the girl who had always been louder, shinier, more beloved. But emotions didn't obey logic. And even when she reminded herself she didn't want him, not anymore, it didn't erase the sting of being replaced before she ever truly belonged. On the night of the ceremony, Eva didn't attend. She wandered to the edge of the territory, where the trees whispered without judgment. She sat beneath a low-bent elm and listened to distant music drifting from the packhouse. Her wolf wasn't restless, just quiet, reflective, a mirror to her own thoughts. She could almost feel Kane's presence somewhere far behind her, wondering, regretting. But he didn't come. And she didn't wait. That was growth, she realized. Choosing herself even when the ache wanted company. The next morning, she found a single white lily at her door. No note. No scent strong enough to trace. But she knew. Only Kane ever paid attention to the flowers she sketched when she was younger. It wasn't an apology. Not a declaration. Just a reminder. She didn't bring the lily inside. She left it on the stone ledge, watched it wilt under the sun, and said nothing when Marin's friends whispered about it later. She had no proof. But that didn't matter. Kane was unraveling. And Eva was no longer the thread he could pull without consequence. One evening, the Luna summoned Eva again. This time it was not questions, it was statements. "You disrupt things," she said, voice calm. "You create uncertainty. That's dangerous." Eva smiled faintly. "I thought wolves respected strength." The Luna leaned forward. "Not when it makes others doubt their own." Eva left the meeting with her head high but her mind racing. The message was clear. They wouldn't exile her. But they would try to shrink her. Reduce her. Keep her tame and quiet. But Eva had spent enough years folding herself into shapes to please others. She was done being small. Kane found her by the stables again, a week after the ceremony. This time he spoke first. "I didn't choose her," he said. Eva looked at him weary. "You didn't stop them from choosing for you." His shoulders tensed. "I thought protecting you meant letting you go." She laughed, soft sharp. "You didn't protect me. You abandoned me." There was no heat in her voice, just truth. And it landed harder than any anger could have. Kane reached for her hand. She didn't move away. But she didn't take it either. He left with nothing but silence. And that, she realized, was her power now. The children began calling her Miss Eva without being told. Simple thing. But meaningful. They saw her. Not as a servant. Not as a threat. Just someone kind. Someone real. It warmed her in ways pack approval never had. The Luna noticed too. Her gaze grew tighter every time Eva entered a room. The pack was shifting, slowly but surely. And not because Eva demanded it. Because she refused to vanish. Refused to break. She showed up, over and over, until her presence could no longer be denied. That night, Kane stood outside her door again. No flowers. No excuses. Just him and his voice. "I was wrong," he said. She opened the door halfway, leaned against the frame. "Which part?" He swallowed hard. "All of it." She didn't answer right away. Her wolf stirred, not with longing but with awareness. This moment mattered. But it wasn't the end. Not yet. "Words are easy, Kane," she said. "If you want to mean them, you'll have to show me." And then she closed the door, softer this time, but still closed. The days blurred into a quiet routine, but Eva felt the shift underneath. She had become more than the girl who vanished and returned. More than the rejected whisper of a story no one wanted to tell. She was visible now. Not by force, not by scandal, but by presence. It was in the way pups reached for her hand first. In the way younger she-wolves paused when she entered the room, unsure whether to greet her or keep their heads down. But with visibility came pressure. She could feel it in every conversation that stopped too quickly, every pair of eyes that lingered too long. The Luna's patience was wearing thin, and Marin, always so perfectly positioned, was cracking beneath her polished surface. Her smiles were more forced, her comments more biting. The pack still circled Kane as their rightful heir, but even that was starting to wobble. And Kane, for all his pride, had started to avoid eye contact when Marin touched his arm. Eva didn't chase power. But she was beginning to understand that when you stop shrinking, the world either adjusts or tries to shrink you again. When Kane asked to walk with her, she expected it to be another quiet encounter full of half-meant words and unfinished sentences. But this time he was different. They took the path that led through the woods behind the eastern field, a place once used for gathering herbs, now overgrown and ignored. "I thought letting you go would protect you," he said without prompting, as they passed a patch of wild lavender. "But I only did what they told me was right. And I hated myself the second I did it." Eva stopped walking. The air was thick with spring pollen and memory. "You didn't protect me, Kane. You erased me. You let their opinion become your spine." He didn't flinch, but he didn't defend himself either. "What would you have done if you were me?" She turned fully to face him. "I would have chosen. Not stood between approval and honesty like a coward." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It cut through the air with the weight of lived truth. Kane looked at her, then really looked. Not with shame but with grief. And finally she saw it. Not a future alpha. Not a boy trying to be something for everyone. Just someone who had never been taught how to be enough for himself. The next full moon approached with tension clinging to the village like fog. The ceremonies were smaller now, more cautious. The council had begun sensing shifts they couldn't quite explain. The people were restless, but no one dared say why. Eva wasn't invited to participate, again. But this time she went. She stood in the crowd, quiet and still, not as a challenge but as a witness. She wore no formal dress, just a pale cloak that made her look ghost-like under the moonlight. Even the pups fell quiet when she walked past. Kane saw her immediately. So did Marin. Marin moved closer to him during the opening chant, her hand brushing his. But he didn't respond. His eyes kept returning to Eva. Not with hunger, not with regret. With awe. And something else. Respect. After the fire was lit, Eva stepped back into the trees. Not to hide, but to let them watch her leave again, and feel it. She didn't need to burn for them to feel her presence. She had already shifted something far deeper than tradition. The gossip that followed wasn't cruel. It was cautious. The elders spoke her name like it was a warning. The young wolves whispered it like it was a question. Even the servants began glancing her way for cues, unsure whether to fear her or follow her. Illyra came to her room that evening with a candle and a quiet smile. "They've started dreaming about you," she said, lighting the flame. "It always starts with dreams. Then questions. Then change." Eva looked at the flickering light and felt her wolf stir, not with hunger but with clarity. Maybe she wasn't meant to become Luna. Maybe her role wasn't next to Kane. Maybe she was something else entirely. Something outside their hierarchy. A symbol of the future they feared. She didn't need titles. She didn't want thrones. But she wouldn't apologize for standing. That night, Marin confronted her behind the kitchen yard, away from prying eyes. Her voice wasn't mocking anymore. It was trembling. "What do you want from him?" she asked, clutching her arms like armor. Eva tilted her head. "Nothing. Not anymore." "Then why is he slipping away from me?" Eva stepped closer, not to threaten but to be heard. "Maybe because I remind him of who he used to be. Before all of this." Marin looked at her for a long moment, eyes shimmering. "He's going to ruin everything." "No," Eva said softly. "He's just finally deciding what's worth protecting." When she left Marin standing there in silence, Eva didn't feel victorious. She felt something shift beneath her skin, like her wolf nodding slowly, approving the honesty. And for the first time, Eva didn't feel like the story anymore. She felt like the narrator. Eva's quiet presence was beginning to reshape the pack, whether the council liked it or not. Pups asked to train with her. Unmated she-wolves sought her out for advice. Even the patrol leaders had begun nodding in respect, though none dared speak it aloud. Change was in the air, not from a battle cry, but from consistency. Eva showed up, listened, did the work. And the pack noticed. The Luna noticed too. She called another private meeting, this time without Kane present. Her tone was clipped, but her eyes were tired. "You're disrupting a structure that has kept us intact for generations," she said. Eva responded evenly. "A structure that's only intact because no one's been allowed to question it." For a moment, the Luna didn't reply. Then, "You're not one of us, Eva. Not fully. You never were." Eva nodded. "And yet I'm still here. Why do you think that is?" The Luna had no answer. Kane began visiting her again, but never unannounced. He waited outside her door until she acknowledged him. He walked beside her, never ahead. He asked instead of assumed. It wasn't romance. Not yet. But it was respect. And for Eva, that meant more than flowers or promises. They spoke of their childhoods in fragments. Kane confessed he used to watch her sketch behind the kennels. "I never told anyone because they would have mocked me," he said. Eva smiled faintly. "And now?" Now I think I'd rather be mocked than forget who I was. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was beginning. The betas gathered one afternoon with quiet tension in the air. They spoke of strengthening unity, restoring tradition, ensuring clarity in the chain of command. No one named Eva directly, but every comment pointed toward her. Still no action was taken, because no one could find fault in her. She had broken no rules. She had claimed no rank. She had simply existed, and that alone was causing fractures in their fragile control. A system that feared authenticity had no defense against someone who wasn't trying to play the game. Later that evening, a younger wolf slipped Eva a note. "Thank you for making space for girls like me." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Eva kept it folded in her sleeve for the rest of the week. Marin had grown quieter. Her sharpness dulled not by defeat, but by fatigue. She no longer tried to outshine Eva in public. Instead she avoided her, which Eva respected. Not every ending had to be loud. One afternoon they passed each other near the well. Neither spoke. But something unspoken passed between them. A truce. Or maybe just an understanding. They had both wanted things the world promised them, and both had been hurt by it. Eva didn't pity Marin, but she didn't hate her either. The world had fed them different lies. They were both still spitting out the taste. Kane stood in the courtyard alone, the night Eva finally spoke first. "If you're going to keep showing up," she said, stepping into the lantern's glow, "then you need to say what you came to say." He turned to her slowly, expression unreadable. "I don't want to ask for your forgiveness. I want to earn your trust back. Slowly, properly, without expectation." Eva studied him. This wasn't the boy who had once walked her to the border. This was someone who had finally chosen discomfort over approval. She nodded once. "Then you'll need to keep showing up. Even when I'm angry. Even when I say nothing. Especially then." "I will," he said. "If you'll let me." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The door didn't close that night when she went inside. It stayed open just enough for someone who meant it to follow. The first sign came from the youngest. A girl no older than 13 shifted mid-conversation, her eyes glowing pale silver instead of gold. The room stilled. Eyes darted toward Eva, then quickly away. No one said it aloud, but they all thought the same thing. The girl had been spending time with Eva, listening, learning. And now, her shift didn't follow pack tradition. Later that night, a parent whispered near the fire circle, "She's going to make them question everything." The Luna overheard and said nothing. Kane heard it too. But instead of looking worried, he looked certain. Eva hadn't set out to change them. She had only wanted to breathe. But now, her breath was in the lungs of the next generation. And no one could take that back. Eva sat beneath the old moonstone tree, tracing the runes carved by wolves long before her. Her wolf stirred as if recognizing the script, not from memory but from instinct. For weeks, she had felt it quietly watching, waiting. Not aggressive, not pushy, just present. And lately, it had begun speaking to her with more clarity. "You are not meant to rise through their ranks," it whispered. "You are meant to rise outside of them." She didn't understand fully yet, but she felt it in her blood. Her wolf wasn't ordinary. It wasn't broken or late. It had only been waiting for her to be strong enough to carry it. And now it guided her, not toward domination but toward presence. At the next gathering, Kane stood behind the council while Marin spoke, poised, polished, rehearsed. But when she reached for Kane's arm, he didn't flinch or step away. He simply didn't move. Until Eva entered the room. Then everything shifted. He stepped forward. Not toward Eva, but between her and the council. "She has earned a voice," he said. "Whether or not you agree." Gasps followed. No one interrupted him. Not even the Luna. Eva didn't thank him. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence that followed was the loudest statement of her life. Illyra appeared that evening, more frail than before, but eyes sharper than ever. You'll be tested soon, she said, sitting with Eva near the garden's edge. Not by teeth or claws. By eyes. By silence. By questions you can't answer. Eva looked at her hands, still marked with garden soil. And if I fail? Then you'll rise again, Illyra said. That's what makes them afraid. They only know how to win once. You know how to return. Eva didn't cry, but her wolf curled tightly inside her like a flame tucking in for the wind. She was ready, not for war, but for the weight of being watched and not breaking under it. That night Maren came to her. No games, no performance. Just two girls on opposite sides of the same scar. I thought if I could be perfect, Maren said, he'd never look away from me. Eva didn't respond immediately. I thought if I disappeared, someone would notice. They sat in that shared ache for a long time. No accusations, no victories, just understanding. Not forgiveness, but something close. As Maren stood to leave, she paused. He still looks at you. Eva looked up at the stars. Maybe he's finally seeing me. Maren gave a small, sad smile. I hope you make him earn it. Eva didn't promise anything, but her silence held weight. And her wolf approved. She wasn't here to compete. She was here to be seen and to stay seen. The announcement came quietly, like most of the council's decisions. A new unity ceremony was being organized, this time under the pretense of restoring tradition. All unmated wolves of age were expected to attend, including Eva. It was the first time her name was included formally, without hesitation. And yet, it felt less like inclusion and more like scrutiny wrapped in silk. She knew what they wanted: to display her, contain her, remind her she belonged to their rules now. The dress they left at her door was deep blue and conservative, unlike anything she would have chosen. Her wolf growled low in disapproval, but Eva folded it gently and laid it across the bed. She wouldn't wear it, but she would go. The room was thick with ceremony the night of the event. Strings of light wrapped around the ancient trees, the scent of pine and oil hanging heavily in the air. Eva walked in slowly, not to make an entrance, but to control her pace. She wore gray. Not a color of mourning, not a color of power, but a choice that didn't belong to them. Every eye turned, some out of curiosity, some out of fear. And Kane, standing near the dais, looked at her as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. She didn't look away, didn't smile, just walked through their expectations like mist. The ceremony paired wolves by touch and instinct, a custom as old as the forest, meant to honor the balance between nature and bond. When the elder approached Eva with the ceremonial ribbon, she didn't resist. But she didn't extend her hand either. I have no pair, she said softly, voice steady. Not because I am unworthy, but because I am enough without one. The crowd stilled, breath held. Even the elders hesitated. The Luna rose, expression unreadable. This ritual is sacred, she said, voice measured. Eva nodded. So is truth. There was no malice in her tone, no rebellion in her stance. Only quiet certainty. Her words didn't break the ritual. They rewrote it. No one moved to stop her. Not this time. When Kane stepped forward, it wasn't to claim her. It was to stand beside her. Silent, visible, without touching. The pairing ended without scandal. But something old had cracked, and something new had taken its place. Whispers bloomed like nightshade the next morning. Some called her arrogant. Others called her wise. The younger wolves began mimicking her quiet resolve, choosing stillness over performance. A girl barely 17 told Eva she'd never seen someone speak and be heard without raising their voice. Eva offered no advice. Just a nod and a whispered thank you. For the first time, she felt her presence ripple beyond her own survival. Not power, just permission. And that was more dangerous than any rebellion. Kane met her that evening near the eastern cliffs, where wind carved the stone smooth. You undid 100 years of tradition with 12 words, he said, voice filled with something like pride and fear. Eva smiled faintly. Tradition that's never questioned turns into a cage. He studied her, as if he still wasn't sure whether she was healing the pack or unraveling it. Eva didn't offer reassurance. Some things were meant to be undone. The Luna summoned her at dawn. This time the air held no tension, only finality. She served Eva tea in silence, her face drawn, elegant as always but changed. "You have reshaped what they believe is possible," she said, staring into her cup. "Not with threats. Not with violence. With presence." Eva sipped her tea and waited. The Luna looked up. "And that makes you dangerous. Even to me." There was no accusation in her tone. Only acknowledgement. Eva didn't reply with triumph or apology. Then perhaps it's time the dangerous ones were invited to lead. The Luna gave a soft laugh, tired but genuine. "Or teach," she murmured. "Teach them how not to be afraid of softness." It wasn't a truce. But it was no longer a war. Eva left the room without looking back, knowing she had finally been heard, even if only once. That night, Eva stood under the stars alone, the wind curling through her cloak like fingers through memory. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, not agitated, not restless, just alive, present. For so long, she had believed that being seen required suffering, that silence had to be earned. But now she understood something simpler. Visibility was not a gift, it was a right. Kane joined her after some time, saying nothing at first. Just standing beside her as he had in the ceremony. "You never needed me," he said finally. Eva turned to him steady. "No. But I'm glad you chose to see me anyway." There was no promise between them. No confession. Just quiet understanding, the kind that built not on need but choice. And that, more than any ceremony or rank, was the bond that mattered. As the wind grew softer, Eva let herself exhale fully. She had returned, not to take anything back, but to become something no one expected, and everything they couldn't ignore. It rained the morning Eva walked into the training yard. Not as a challenge, not to make a scene, but because one of the younger wolves asked if she'd teach him how to anchor his focus. "You seem like you're never afraid," he'd said, eyes wide and uncertain. Eva almost laughed. But instead she nodded. "I'm always afraid. I've just learned how to breathe through it." By noon, 6 wolves had joined. By sundown, 12. None of them had been assigned. None of them cared. They followed her because she taught without shame and corrected without judgment. The beta walked past once, narrowed his eyes and said nothing. Kane stood nearby, arms crossed, not as alpha, but as a witness. The pack's rhythm was changing. Not by decree, but by quiet choice. One wolf at a time. The Luna's niece, Marin, began to fade from the center of things. Not from failure but from fatigue. She no longer fought Eva with words or glances. Instead, she moved through the village with softer steps. And it was during one of these silent days that she found Eva near the herb gardens, humming quietly as she clipped lavender. "I envied you," Marin said, voice low. "Because you didn't need approval to stand." Eva didn't stop working. "And I envied you," she replied. "Because you always knew where you belonged." For a long moment, neither said anything. Then Marin reached into her cloak and handed Eva a folded scrap of paper. "It's the old rite of Luna. The one they don't teach anymore. Thought you might want to read it." Eva accepted it without promise. But her wolf responded, curious, alert. The past wasn't her enemy. It was her origin. Eva sat with Illyra later that evening, the paper open between them. "They buried this rite after the last Luna died," Illyra explained. "Because it required more than lineage. It required presence." Eva traced the words. "A Luna is not crowned," she is confirmed. "By the wolves she does not command but uplifts." Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't tremble. But something inside her settled. Not because she needed the role, but because it no longer frightened her. Illyra looked at her with tired but bright eyes. "You could claim it now. And no one would stop you." "I don't want to claim anything," Eva said. "I want them to choose differently." even when no one's watching. Kane met her by the riverbank, the place they used to pass as children but never stopped to linger. "They're watching you more than me now," he said with a crooked smile. Eva looked toward the water, sunlight glittering against it. "That was never the goal." "I know," he said. "That's why it's working." He stepped closer but not too close. "I was raised to think love came after loyalty, to the pack, to duty, to family. But I think maybe love is what comes before all of that. If it's real." Eva turned to him, not as the girl who waited, but as the woman who had returned. "Then show me." "Not with promises. With patience. With presence. No grand gestures. Just truth." Kane nodded. "Every day if you'll let me." She didn't say yes, but she stayed. The pack gathered that week for a seasonal rite, an old tradition of storytelling and memory sharing beneath the harvest moon. It had always been led by the elders, structured and polite. But when Illyra stood to speak, she paused and looked to Eva. "Stories belong to those who remember them," Illyra said. "And to those who help others find their voice again." Then she sat. The circle shifted. All eyes on Eva. She rose slowly, not to perform, but to speak. "I was born between silence and fear," she said. "But I am not here to relive that. I'm here to remind anyone listening. You can leave. You can return. And you can still belong." There was no applause. Only stillness. The kind that lives in bones and memory. That night, Eva didn't just stand in the circle. She became part of it. News of the storytelling circle traveled fast. By morning, Eva's name was no longer whispered. It was spoken. Not with fear. Not with suspicion. But with curiosity. With a strange kind of reverence. She had not demanded anything, yet the entire pack had seen her in the firelight. And something about the way she stood, the steadiness, the grace, lingered with them long after. Children played her story out with sticks and cloaks. The elders no longer corrected them. And Kane, who had once believed leadership was measured in titles, now saw power in every silence Eva chose not to break. He walked beside her through the village paths, not as her shadow, not as her future, but as someone finally learning how to follow. The beta called for a gathering. There was no official reason, but everyone knew it was about Eva. "You've unsettled us," he said before the entire pack. "Not with violence. With disruption. You've changed how the young speak. How the elders listen." Eva stepped forward only when the floor was opened. "I didn't come back to change anything," she said, voice calm. "I came back so that others like me didn't have to leave to find their worth." A murmur ran through the crowd. Not disapproval, but recognition. The beta didn't challenge her again. He didn't need to. The people had heard enough. And this time they remembered. Marin approached her with a wrapped box. "It's not from me," she said, eyes softer now. "It's from my mother. She says she saw you in a dream. Carrying fire, not burning with it." Inside was a carved moon pendant. Silver, aged and sacred. A mark once worn by Lunas generations ago. Eva didn't put it on. She held it in her palm and nodded. "Tell her thank you. And that I'm still deciding what I am." "You're what we should have been learning from," Marin whispered. "Not fearing." The two women parted that day, not as rivals. Not as friends. But as survivors who had stopped blaming each other for the scars left by a system that served neither. Kane brought her a journal, blank and leather-bound. "In case you ever want to tell it from the beginning," he said. Eva ran her fingers over the cover. "There are pieces I still haven't made sense of. Then write them down. Even the broken ones." She looked up at him then. Not for answers. But for presence. He had changed. Not because she demanded it, but because he had unraveled and rebuilt himself in silence beside her. That, to Eva, was the truest proof of love. Not words, not declarations, but growth she hadn't had to guide. "I'm not writing a story for them," she said. "I'm writing so I don't forget who I was before I was remembered." The full moon rose with no ritual this time. No circle. No fire. Just Eva, standing at the border she had once been left at, the wind now wrapping around her like an embrace instead of exile. Her wolf pulsed beneath her skin, not loud but steady. Oh, wait. Kane stood a few steps behind, watching her as she pressed her hand to the old stone marking the edge of the territory. I thought I'd leave, she said. Years ago I used to dream of it. Leaving and never looking back. And now, he asked. She turned to him, her face calm. Now I know I don't have to leave to belong somewhere else. I just had to become it. He stepped beside her, close but not touching. She didn't move away. The moonlight pooled around them, soft and silver. Eva smiled. She had never needed to be chosen. She had only needed to return as someone who couldn't be forgotten. And now she never would be.
Weeks passed without major ceremony, and yet Eva's presence continued to echo through the rhythm of pack life. No new title had been given to her, no official seat at the council, but when discussions arose about territory, about fairness, about the treatment of the young, people turned their heads in her direction. Not to seek permission, but clarity. She had become the still point in a spinning world.
She didn't lead through command. She listened. And that simple act shifted more minds than orders ever could. When she spoke, it wasn't to dominate, but to ask better questions. Her voice didn't carry like Kane's, but it lingered. And those who once dismissed her now found themselves reshaping their words in her presence. Not out of fear, but respect. Eva found herself sought out by mothers, some of whom had watched her grow up in silence. They came not to flatter, but to ask. How do you raise a girl who doesn't roar but still deserves to be heard? Eva didn't pretend to have answers. She simply offered what had worked for her. Teach her to listen to her wolf before anyone else's voice, she said. Even yours. She began helping with lessons. Not just physical training but confidence. She asked the pups to describe how they felt. Not just how fast they could run. It unnerved some of the betas. But it began to heal something unspoken in the pack. The idea that strength had to be loud. That leadership had to be sharp. Through Eva they were learning new forms of power. Quieter, deeper, unshakable. One night, Eva sat alone at the top of the watchtower. The stars above her felt impossibly close, the village lights below faint and soft. Kane joined her after a long while, 2 mugs in hand. I keep wondering, he said, settling beside her. If I'd chosen you then, when it mattered, would all this have happened? Eva took the mug but didn't look at him. I wasn't ready then. And neither were you. He exhaled slowly. Do you think we are now? She finally turned. I think we're becoming. It wasn't a yes. But it wasn't a no. It was the most honest thing she could offer. And this time he didn't flinch from her truth. He nodded and stayed. A traveling alpha passed through the territory that season. His pack was known for its discipline, its rigid structure. He sat with the elders, asked questions, made assessments. But what caught him off guard wasn't Kane. It was Eva. The way the others paused when she entered a space. The way the pups ran to her without being called. The way she never raised her voice, but somehow quieted others just by standing still. She holds something more dangerous than dominance, he said later. She holds their attention without demanding it. The Luna only smiled. She was never meant to lead by tradition, she replied. She was meant to show us what we forgot. Eva returned to the border one evening, not out of sadness but closure. The stone where she once woke with Kane's scent and silence pressed to her skin was still there. But now it smelled of earth, of pine, of memory. Her wolf didn't tense. Hummed. Not for what was lost, but for what had been found. Kane appeared a few steps behind. No words, no explanations. Just presence. She glanced back, the wind curling around them both. This place used to hurt, she said. And now? She placed her hand on the stone. Now it reminds me that I survived. She walked away, not because she was leaving, but because she could. The difference was everything. The council met again, this time under gentler circumstances. There were no accusations, no complaints, only questions, quiet ones, about structure, inclusion, the future of leadership. It was the first time Eva had been asked to sit with them officially, not as a formality, but as a contributor. She didn't dress differently. She didn't change her voice. But when she spoke, the room leaned toward her. "I don't want to replace your ways," she said. "But I do want to remind you they were built for a world that feared softness. We don't have to fear it anymore." There was no applause. But neither was there resistance. For the first time, they weren't arguing her presence. They were adjusting to it. Eva took on something small that week, organizing evening walks for the children whose parents worked late. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't symbolic. But it gave her joy. And it taught the young ones how to move through the world slowly, with attention. One girl asked if wolves could be kind and still lead. "That's the only kind of leadership I trust," Eva replied. Word of her group spread. Not because she advertised it, but because parents began noticing how calm their pups became. They listened more, fought less, thought before they spoke. It became known as Eva's hour, and no one tried to claim it. Kane helped once or twice during her walks, but only when she asked. He had stopped trying to prove anything. Instead, he focused on doing what she'd always done. Show up, be still, listen. One evening, he caught her watching him as he lifted a child who had fallen. "You're different now," she said. Kane smiled. "I finally stopped trying to lead like my father." Eva nodded. "And started learning from the people around you." It wasn't flirtation. It was truth. And it meant more than any kiss could have. The Luna called Eva into the forest one dawn, not for conflict but connection. "I fought your presence for years," she said, "because I thought it weakened everything we'd built." Eva waited. "And now?" The Luna placed a hand on the old tree between them. "Now I think it makes us honest." They stood in the quiet. Two women who had both endured the weight of expectation. There was no ceremony, no apology, just shared air and the first real peace between them. Eva didn't need the Luna's approval, but receiving her honesty felt like healing. Under the fading blue of twilight, the pack gathered, not for tradition, not for hierarchy, but for memory. Each wolf brought one object that reminded them of something they had once feared and overcome. Eva brought a stone from the border. Kane brought a feather from the ridge he'd once climbed alone as a boy. The children listened. The elders spoke. And when Eva stepped forward, she held her stone high. "I carry this not because of what was done to me," she said, "but because I came back and stayed." No one clapped. But every wolf in the circle placed their object in the fire afterward. A new tradition was born. And Eva, still without title, still without demand, became the story they told when they needed to remember who they could become. Autumn arrived quietly, with cool air and golden leaves dancing through the village paths. Eva had never imagined staying this long. Once she thought survival meant leaving. Now it meant being rooted. Not trapped but chosen. She no longer felt like the outsider who returned. She felt like part of the ground things grew from. A pup approached her one morning, holding a wilted flower. "My sister said you don't belong here," he whispered. "But I think you're the reason we feel safe." Eva knelt beside him and smiled. "Tell your sister that sometimes it takes someone who was pushed out to show everyone else how to hold the door open." The pup didn't fully understand. But he would. Kane had been watching her, not with longing but with pride. He'd learned not to reach for what wasn't his to hold. Still they shared meals now. One night, after most had gone to sleep, he asked, "What would it take for you to believe I'm worth choosing again?" Eva didn't answer right away. She stared at the stars. "Time. And not chasing me. Just being there, even when I don't look back." He nodded. "Then I'll be still." And he was. For weeks he didn't press, didn't flirt. Just stayed close enough to be known, far enough to give her room. In that quiet, something deeper bloomed. The elders held a small ceremony in Eva's honor, not to elevate her, but to acknowledge her. No titles were spoken, no declarations made. But each person stood, one at a time, and shared how she had changed something in them. "You reminded me I could be soft with my daughter," said a stoic father. "You helped me understand I don't have to wait to be chosen," said a young girl. "You listened when no one else did," said the Luna. Eva didn't cry, but her wolf stirred and settled in her chest like warmth. Winter whispered through the trees again. A full year since her return, Eva visited the border once more, not for closure but to reflect. Kane found her there, snow in his hair, eyes calm. "This is where you left me," she said. "This is where I lost you," he replied. They stood in silence. Then Eva took his hand, not as a promise but as presence. "Let's not rewrite what happened," she said. "Let's just walk forward differently." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Together," she nodded. "Not every day, but when it matters." On the first spring morning, Eva planted seeds in the garden behind the packhouse. Pups helped her, laughter ringing across the yard. She showed them how to press the soil gently, how to whisper to the roots. Someone once asked her if she would ever become Luna. "No," she answered. "I became something else." "What?" they asked. Eva looked across the blooming earth, the open windows, the stillness she had earned. "A beginning,"